All right. So we have 75 minutes and we're going to talk about some of the most interesting things in life, perhaps. The craftsmanship behind the professional dialogues that I guess we all love to some degree. And my hopes for this session is to create a space where we can chip in, where we can all reflect, and hopefully you will find the things I present interesting and use it as an occasion to talk about yourselves and your own experiences. I'm not going to read all of this aloud, but I'm Jacob. I'm 40 years old. I am in Aarhus in Denmark. I wonder how many of you might have been and visited Aarhus. It's a quite small city in Denmark, and I have been working with coaching since 2006. And I absolutely love professional dialogues, not just coaching, but every situation, every context where professional dialogues contributes to the value we create with other people. So that's pretty much what has guided my professional life since 2006. Today, I am the president of the EMCC Denmark. I also saw you, Tor Erik, the president of Norway, and other great people as well. And I work as a consultant. I do quite a lot of coaching. I train coaches. I do supervision. I also work as an assessor with EMCC Global. So a lot of my professional life revolves around coaching and professional dialogues. And we have perhaps 70 minutes left of this conversation. And as I mentioned, I really hope that you feel like engaging yourself and chipping into the general conversation in this room. And when we have 70 minutes, I hope that by the end of this session, you will all maybe just have a friendly reminder of something great going on in your practice. Perhaps you discovered something new about your craftsmanship in your practice, or perhaps you have been inspired by some of the people you're going to talk to along the way. But my hopes is that when we actually sit here for 70 minutes moving forward, please take at least one thing away from this session. Is that all right? I realize it's a kind of rhetorical question, but I see some of you nodding out there.
Nods too, yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
On a thumb from Ray, marvelous.
Perfect. And I will just headline what we're going to talk about. We will say hi to each other in a few moments' time. Then we're going to share some of my inspirations so you know where I come from in my professional practice. Then I will introduce professional dialogical capacity as my sort of headline for how we can look at the craftsmanship behind coaching and also how we can work with it. Then I will go into more details about what it contains. So what are the different elements of this model? And then we're going to have conversations with each other and we're going to reflect together about how we recognize ourselves in this model and also all of the other great stuff and perspectives and experiences that sits with you that would be easily shared. Yes. And enough of my monologue. So what I would love for you to talk about is just saying hi to each other and make new acquaintances in this professional dialogue. And then also discuss what aspects of today's session about this craft behind the coaching do you find interesting? So what brought you to today's session? And when we get back in the main room after the breakout session, we will share a few headlines from the group and we'll see what happens. So welcome back, everyone. I hope that you had time enough to get acquainted and perhaps also discuss what aspects of today's session you find particularly interesting. And please share it in the chat, everyone. So please share perhaps a thought or two from your session right now about what you find interesting about this craft behind coaching. And I already saw one great question from Dorota in the chat, and I'll get back to that as well.
Lost me chat. There it is.
Principles that guide our practice. Love that wording. Collaboration among coaches, that is possible. Culture of coaching, great theme. The science and art, great words of co-creating fruitful communication. Love it.
Oh, reciprocal AI
Mm.
augmentation. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And Ersta says that coaching is a professional art. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
I'm scrolling. That involves deep listening and generative questions. Go to the core. Yes.
Mm.
Oh, continuously working to learn and develop. And we were just talking as you were coming in about the need to finding your coaching style and finding who you are as a coach and how you coach.
Yes.
I see Matthew's hand up. Do you want to chip in?
Yes, Matthew.
Yeah, what I brought up in our session was the most important tool that you have to work with is you.
Mm.
And if you overcomplicate a powerful conversation with too many tools, you risk diluting your true self. So you just have to be super careful. I've seen it with some coaches where they turn into robots and not themselves. And I've seen on a few different kind of groups that I'm in, people asking, what tools should I use? What tools should I bring in? And I keep on responding with the same answer. You're the only tool that you need in your coaching session. But one thing at the end of our session came up as well.
Mm.
I'm 2.5 years retired-ish, semi-retired. You wouldn't know looking at my calendar, but I used to be the advice giver because just what I did and what I did for 37 years. But now I'm starting to see, I was in a conversation where there was coaching going on and one person that didn't really know what was going on, and they were just lobbing out advice like they were smarties. And it's incredible when you see and you hear and notice the difference between forcing advice on somebody and just giving permissionative input.
Oh, great example, Matthew. And perhaps you've seen my slides because some of your points are so relevant in one of the aspects of the things I'm gonna show you later, but your way of expressing it is a bit sharper than I'm gonna do. So thank you in advance, Matthew. And I also see a lot of great perspectives in the chat. I love Davo's practice towards mastery maturity. I love the point of that we are the important factor in this. And I also love the point that building a craft, I'm not sure if it translates from Danish as easily as I perhaps think, but in Danish, craftsmanship is something that you build through an entire life. It's something that you need to really pay attention to. You have to have a look at yourself. You have to develop yourself. You have to stay present with your own professional identity. So I really love Davo's word in the chat that it's all about practicing towards mastery, not arriving at a specific place, but always trying to fine-tune and develop your mastery, your maturity on how you work with professional dialogues. And just so you know who is talking, some of my key influences on how I see professional dialogues and how I work with coaching is from systemic theory. How many of you are acquainted with systemic theory? Just raise your hand.
You do a virtual hand if your cat thing is off.
Yeah, it could be a virtual hand.
Quite a few.
Yeah, and not the same, but related approach. The narrative practice has influenced me in a great deal. Perhaps some of you know Michael White. We have David Drake as a current practitioner. I'm also very, very interested in existential philosophy. What this whole concept about being human, what does it mean? I think there are so many great perspectives to get from that branch as well. I'm also very influenced by pragmatism. Perhaps some of you have heard of John Dewey, Richard Rorty, the likes. And one of the great things I love about John Dewey is that he says, we do not learn from experiences. So we do not learn alone from experiences, but we learn from reflecting on our experiences. And that's two quite different things. So you can gather all the experiences in your whole professional life, but that doesn't necessarily become learning. So in order to learn, we have to reflect on our experiences. And I just love that concept about being human. Complexity perspective, especially with you in England, Nicola, you have some great environments for developing thoughts on complexity in organizations and between people. Mm-hmm. Those are probably my key influential perspectives on my practice, just so you know. And let's talk about professional dialogical capacity. This is simply my way of trying to connect all the things I have experienced matter in how to build your craft as a coach, as a practitioner. So this is not rocket science at all. It's just me trying to connect all the important perspectives into a single framework that I find very useful, both in my coaching sessions, in my training of coaches, but I also use it when I work with leaders. I use it when I work with other professionals that need to learn something. Yes, let's have a look. My idea of what professional dialogues is all about and coaching is that we need to work our craftsmanship to a place where we have the ability to facilitate the dialogues that need to take place. So this is a very simple definition of professional dialogues, but I really like it. It's all about the ability to facilitate the dialogues that need to take place. And before I go deeper into this, what do you think of this definition? You can share your thoughts in the chat. What I like about it is that, as we learned from Matthew's example just before, the world needs all sorts of different dialogues. What makes the difference with coaching is that we're in a professional field as coaches where it's not what we believe should take place. It's all about creating value with others. So our job is not about us. It's about facilitating what needs to take place at the other. Okay, so people chip in here. I would simplify to the ability to facilitate the dialogues. Yeah. And that need to take place is simply my perhaps intention about that there also needs to be something at stake in those professional dialogues. They can be internal, yeah, I agree. Needs to take place in the eyes of the beholder, I totally agree, and therefore we should be very skilled at contracting, for example. Go in with an open heart and mind, I love that. Is to listen and share observations, I love that. Open facilitation space. Yeah. Yeah, wonderful. Not sure about ability. More think of it like presence to facilitate. I like that perspective as well. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I'll just move it a bit along. Because my effort to try and connect all the different perspectives in learning situations and in training situations and in trying to encompass the craftsmanship, I developed this model, professional dialogical capacity, and let's have a look at that. So this is how it looks like. It's 4 circles, it's 4 domains, and in my perspective, each of these domains represents something very distinct that we should be able to work with as professional coaches and professional dialogical practitioners. I will go more into detail about the 4 domains, but just to begin, I'll just try and see if I can, well, We have the foundational mindset and building on Matthew's point. This is all that is us. So I'm looking at you, Angela, right now. I hope it's all right. Is that all right? So when looking at Angela as a practitioner, the foundational mindset is all about what lives inside of Angela. So I wonder what has formed your practice. I wonder what wonderful experiences and influences you've had in your entire life that has taken place inside of you and shaped the way you meet people and you facilitate dialogues. Moving on to the relational alliance. I don't think it's unfair to say that we all agree that the relation is a pivotal aspect of professional dialogues. And in every conversation, we need to build that relational alliance. So, still looking at you, Angela, I hope it's all right. Moving to that domain, it's all about how Angela connects with the people whom she's facilitating dialogues for. So her ability to create connection, to be present, all of the wonderful things that goes on in the relation that we need to establish. And then moving on to the next domain. It's all about methods, tools, and techniques. And perhaps some of you also train other coaches, and I do it quite a lot. And I always ask, so after this program has finished, what do you hope to take away from this program? And quite a lot of the people I train, they focus instantly on this domain, the tools and techniques. And to be quite frank, this was the domain that I fell in love with when I initially met coaching. I love a good tool. I love a good model. I love to see how you can put dialogues into advanced models that can shape things and make me reflect. But one very central aspect of this model is that the two other domains, they come first. Tools, techniques, and the whole methodology behind coaching is very important, but it's not the most important thing. And we shouldn't oversteer our conversations from that domain. And then the last domain is the professional domain, not our own professional domain, but the practice context of our coachee, of our clients. So this is where we should be able to see the magic. This is where we should see the value, the fruit of our efforts in the dialogue. So whenever Angela, she finishes up a conversation, and perhaps you might ask, okay, so what did you take away from this session? Their answer should relate to the professional domain. What did I take away from this session that helps me in my practice, in my world, in my specific context? Okay, so I will move forward. I hope it's okay.
It reminds me of this. You were saying that the models and the tools are handy, and it's great. What was that quote? And somebody will know. And I forget who said it, but I want to say George Block, and I don't know why I want to say George Block, but it's like all models are useless, but some are useful. Or no models work, but some are useful, or something like that. And it's like a little toolkit, isn't it?
Yeah, I love the pragmatic element of your quote, that tools in themselves are not worth that much. But we need to know when to bring them into the conversation and how to bring them into the conversation. But first, we need to, address something else, and let's have a look. Because first, let's begin with where we ended. The professional domain is something that we should obviously care about in our professional dialogues. So it's where the value is created with the client, it's output, learning, solution, insights that might live on from the conversation. So how would we might recognize it in our own practice? It's where we understand the client's context and challenges. It's our ability to align the dialogue goals with practical outcomes and the needs of the clients. It's also about not taking over their practice domain. So it's about supporting our clients in their own expertise, in their own life and context. And sometimes perhaps you also recognize that you actually need some knowledge about the very practical domain that your clients find themselves in. Sometimes I do, and sometimes it's not the case. You can think along those lines with me. Sometimes you perhaps also recognize that you need to know the language of the clients that we're trying to serve. So some contextual lingo might also be useful or perhaps even necessary in order for us to help the clients. Yes. So questions I sometimes ask myself: how much should I actually know about the context and professional domain in order for me to help the coachees? How is the choices I make, are the choices I make always creating value in this specific domain? You can think along these lines, but I'll move forward. I hope it's okay. And then back to the third domain about methods, tools, and techniques. As I mentioned, it's our ability to use and apply appropriate methods, tools, and techniques when they create value and how they create value in the conversation. So, of course, we should know our models and techniques. Of course, we should learn models and techniques. And I love a quotation. Perhaps some of you have heard of Gianfranco Cecchin. Unfortunately, he's dead. He was Italian and he was associated with the Milan School, a systemic group of practitioners. And one of his great points is that, yes, we need to learn all of the methods, all of the tools. We need to learn them, and we need to learn them so we know them by heart, because then we can abandon them. So what we need to do with these methods is to get them under our skin so that they can not direct a conversation, but when we're staying truly present with the people we're trying to help in the professional dialogues, then we can draw them into the conversation when we need them. And drawing on another influence of mine, Carl Tom, a Canadian psychiatrist, he says that if you have any doubts about if you should follow the human in front of you or you should follow the model, always choose, yes, of course, you know, always choose the human in front of you. Follow the human and the model will come along. But he also mentions that if we, while we're following the human right in front of us, have any spare capacity, then it's a very good idea to also stay present with the model and creating an intentionality about how we choose our next move, also thinking about the model. Yes. Does this make sense? This is a rhetorical question. Some of you are nodding. I appreciate that. Yeah, perfect. Then I'll move on to another influence of mine, but from a different ballgame. Perhaps some of you recognize this gentleman. His name is Kevin De Bruyne, and I saw a quotation of him that reminds me of the things I try to do in my coaching practice. And I think it's wonderful. I'm just going to read it out loud, and you're already reading it. Perfect. I don't really use a lot of tricks when he plays football. I can do the tricks. I use them when I'm having fun in training, but in the games, I'm trying to be efficient. Isn't this wonderful? I love this quote. Mm-hmm. So what he says that resonates so deeply with me is that, yes, we should be able to use the models and techniques. And we can use them in our supervision and when we train, and we can also experiment in our conversations. But in conversations, it's not about showing off. Coaching professional dialogues, it's not a sport for the spectators. It's something that takes place right here between us and another human being. And if we stay present and if we keep our eyes on the ball, the human, then the models come in at second place. So this was the second domain I introduced. And of course, we should be able to create an effective professional relational alliance with our coachees and clients. This is pivotal if we want to succeed. And one of the things I learned along the way is that creating a relational alliance is not about creating a good alliance or a good relation. It's not about making the coachee like me. It's about creating an effective alliance towards the goals of the coachee. And that's something slightly different than just creating a good relation. So in the relation, we should build it so that we can also sometimes challenge the people we try to help in the dialogue. Sometimes we should just support them. Sometimes we should just be patient and listen. And sometimes they need something entirely different. So we need to have a focus on the relation and build the relation in a way that suits the purpose of our relationship. And I learned quite a lot about myself in this specific domain. I'll get back to that. And perhaps you also see sorts of different aspects in your professional practice that relates to this specific domain. So it's about creating psychological safety, empathy, recognizing and addressing power dynamics and relational patterns in the relationship. All of that wonderful, chaotic aspects that just emerges in every relationship, and that are particularly interesting and important when we try to create an effective professional alliance. Okay, does this make sense? Yeah. And then at last, we arrive at the foundational mindset. Now we're back to all of the wonderful things that goes on inside of Angela, inside all of us. So I wonder what wonderful experiences, painful experiences have shaped the way you see the world. I wonder who have trained you in coaching. I wonder who your influences are. I wonder what books you have read your entire life. I wonder what values you have inside of you. I wonder how you would describe your professional identity as a coach. I wonder what kind of biases you represent. Some of them you have perhaps discovered, and perhaps we all have all sorts of different biases that we have yet to discover. But all of those things are so wonderfully important in our practice as coaches. And if we don't realize them, if we don't give them space, then we will, in worst case, hinder our ability to create the space, facilitate the dialogues that need to take place. I don't think this is rocket science. Of course, we all know this. But what I like about my own model is that this is more important than knowing the tools of the coaching trade. Because if we have all sorts of unrealized stuff going on in our foundational mindset, they will show themselves in the relation and our ability to create effective relations. And it will also affect our way of using methods, tools, techniques, and then it will, worst case, hinder our ability to create value in the practical domain. So my model is about the 4 domains. We need to pay attention in each of the 4 domains, and we can work in them separately to build our coaching craftsmanship. But where it gets really interesting, building on the thought from John Dewey, experiences alone in each of the 4 domains. They are helpful, but not enough. Where the magic happens is when we reflect on how the 4 domains are related to one another. So, for instance, myself, I'm not sure if you could tell already from your knowledge of me, but I'm quite impatient sometimes. I have a very impatient side of me. So this is something that lives inside of my foundational mindset. But please help me, and please help me in the chat. If my impatience goes unchecked into my coaching relations, how might that translate into the relation? How might a coachee experience my impatience?
Yeah, pop in the chat, everybody. I'm thinking the coachee might take it personally.
Yeah, that's probably something.
If they have to hurry up.
Yeah.
Impacting feeling listened to, says Rachel.
Mm-hmm.
And
I love
Devo
that.
says, yeah, lack of presence.
Lack of presence. They're not doing it. I love that.
Mm.
Yeah. Might see you pushing them for answers. Yes. Lack of curiosity. Yes. Feel rushed, pushed, sent into a direction, stress, or shut down. I love it. Thank you so much. And you can continue. And Nicola, please help me if more emerges in the chat. But
Yeah.
I love it. You have just brought forward excellent examples on why we should care about what's going on inside ourselves, because those things truly translate into the relationship as well.
Jacob, can I ask you a question on that one, actually? How do you
Yes.
recognize in yourself when your impatience may be taking over? Have you got little internal triggers which jump up and go? How do you recognize it?
Well, best case scenario, I have learned to discover my impatience before it emerges in the conversation. But I also sometimes use it as how do you translate that? Occasion for timing out in the conversation. So sometimes I might bring this up in the conversation, not as impatience, but perhaps mirroring or sharing that, I can tell from listening to myself that I feel a slight need to push this conversation. How do you feel about this? Or would this be relevant? Or would this be appropriate in regards to what you need right now? And apart from that, I simply train my listening skills. And I never get finished with that. I look at quite a lot of video of myself, and that's equally painful every time. Maybe some of you also look at yourself on video, and I hate it and I love it every time. But I use that for an occasion to spot my impatience and looking at patterns. Okay, so when is it my impatience emerges in the conversation? Okay, it's typically when this happens, or this happens, or this happens. Okay, so what might I do differently the next time, or what might I reflect on that could strengthen my ability to, as you mentioned, and I love it, stay present, not pushing, not leading. This supports human-to-human interactions and not algorithms. Yes, a friendly nod to the AI field. Yeah, and we also, and I love it because we have it in the chat for afterwards. Good stuff. Perhaps a good place to get inspiration. Yes, and obviously my impatience, it might also turn up in my choice of methods and techniques and tools. I might choose something that pushes answers or leads in a certain direction, and that might hinder my ability to create value. Thank you for playing along. I love it. And I brought in another one of my inspirations, this time Robert De Niro. Perhaps some of you remember the film Heat from 1995. You can nod if you recognize this title. I was a very young boy when I saw it the first time, so I had to look at it again later on before realizing the wisdom behind this quote. But at some point, and he's an antagonist in this movie actually, he says, "Don't let yourself get attached to anything you're not willing to walk out on in 30 seconds flat if you feel the heat around the corner." And perhaps not as much the last part of this quotation, but especially the first part. And please contribute in the chat. What kind of wisdom is he trying to convey to us as coaches in this quotation? Don't let yourself get attached to anything you're not willing to walk out on in 30 seconds flat. I think we should just be patient, Nicola, because, yeah, Michelle, in Danish, you would call, your name would be Michelle. Perhaps it's the same. Her own biases, assumptions, etc. Yes. And I already mentioned Gianfranco Cecchini, the Italian, associated with the Milan School, systemic therapists. He has this wonderful word, and I'm not able to pronounce it perfectly every time, but irreverence. Irreverence.
You did well.
Is that close to something useful, Nicola?
It's perfect. It's perfect pronunciation. It's a bit my pronunciation of your surname, Jacob.
You'll have another go later. But irreverence, I love that word. In Danish, it's uærbødighed. So try that for a word. But irreverence, the ability to question your own assumptions. So when I'm thinking, okay, this might be a good solution, or this might be a great question, or if Angela was coaching me, Angela's ability to say, okay, I might feel that this would be a helpful way for Jacob to move forward, but then at the same time think, but it might not. So the ability to question our own assumptions, our own thoughts, our ability to stay present, curious, and open towards practically everything that goes on in the conversation, not as a way of not making decisions, but as a way of staying open, keeping the playing ground as large as possible for possible ways of directing the conversation. And equally important, not falling in love with their own perspectives. So being able to doubt what we just say. And one of the things I truly learned from growing my experiences is that whenever I'm in doubt, I sometimes get the urge to just move in a direction. Sometimes I might try to bluff, to pretend that I'm competent and I know exactly what this conversation needs to move helpfully forward. But when I experience doubt, I've discovered that it's a very powerful thing to bring into the conversation. You can simply just be transparent. You can simply just share that. I'm actually having a doubt right now about what would be a helpful way to move this conversation. Could you help me? And this is something I would never do back in 2006 when I had my first coaching conversations, because I was feeling I needed to be in control of the process. I needed to demonstrate my competence. So I would never use doubt explicitly. But now when I discover it in other people, I find it so extremely accomplished when people share their doubts. And thank you, Michelle. It's all about being humble. Yes. And may I share just a short story? Well, you can't really say no, so I'll make it quick. But one of the first major tasks I had as a coach, it's perhaps 10 years ago, an HR department hired me to have coaching conversations with the direction and upper leader group in a public organization in Denmark. So my task was to get in the room and have conversations with each of the leaders in order to help them direct their leadership in a difficult time. And I had great conversations, or at least good conversations with most of them. But then the last conversation was with the CEO of the company. So I'm entering the room and I prepare myself and I sit down. And then the CEO enters the room. We haven't met before. It was the HR department and the head of HR that had hired me. And in the second the CEO enters the room, he looks at me and he looks disappointed. And this is just playing out in a few seconds' time. But he looks at me, and obviously it's only my perspective, but he looks disappointed at me. Can you see that? Can you see that for your own image? So how would you respond if you were a coach, perhaps young coach as me, sitting ready to engage in a coaching conversation, and the person you're about to coach enters the room and he looks extremely disappointed? How would you respond to that? I'll share how I responded, and I have thought about this many times. I did not respond the way I hope I will today, but how would you respond in that moment? And perhaps, Nicola, if someone is holding up a hand, we could just open the mic.
Three things. I suppose first and foremost, it's an assumption that their face is saying you're too young and therefore incompetent. But however, that may not be an accurate portrayal of their mind. And then following that, I would trust myself, my confidence in who I am, and allow the process then to move forward and to see what happens next.
Love it. Thank you. And we have room for an additional perspective. Anyone feels like chipping in?
Yes, I'll take the word then. Now, that's definitely a challenge for a coach, whoever would be in your place, so don't worry about it. But that's also a fight they are driving, and it's their fight. And my advice from the non-coach perspective, which shouldn't give advices, but here we are more like in a mentorship context, is not to get involved, because this is an exercise that we are constantly driving. For instance, we frequently have the pendants of giving advices, but we hold it up, right? So this is the same reaction that could be useful in this situation when you are being put in front of maybe an invitation to a conflict, either direct or indirect one, but it's part of our job to keep it cool and to help them deal with their own fight that they're having.
Love it. Thank you, Adina. And Nicola, I can see more hands, but I think we should probably move on, because it's so important that we have time at the end of the session to connect. And I'll just share briefly what I did. I overemphasized the methodology part of my own model. So what I tried to do was being competent by showing off. I tried to present all of the best questions I possibly could figure out, and I tried to really drive the process competently by me showing off how accomplished of a technical coach I was, and nothing really good came out of it. Don't tell anyone. All right, I will just linger here for a second, because one of the things I hope you will discuss with each other is how you have realized that you have matured in your craftsmanship, in your coaching practice. And I won't mention all of this, but some of the things I discovered in my practice that I appreciate is that I am much better at enduring silence, using silence in conversations. Such a powerful tool, but it also reflects on my own ability to trust myself and trust the process. So I show less off. I ask shorter questions instead of long, complex ones. I try to discover all of the things that's going on inside of me. I'm also kind of a people pleaser. Perhaps some of you are also members of that club, the club of people who like to please, because we like to create harmony and we like it better when everyone is feeling safe. But I really need to pay attention to that side of me, because if that goes unchecked into my relational dynamics, then it's not helpful. I also try to have the courage to risk the conversation if something feels off. If I'm not the right person to do this job, or if they don't really have a need for this conversation, I really try and remind myself to have the courage to address that directly in the conversation. I also try and recognize when I'm actually putting in too much work in the conversation. So when am I trying to move this conversation ahead too hard? Or basically, when am I perhaps doing the work for my clients? So when should I lean back and let my clients do the work instead of me? And you have tons of examples of this, I'm sure, and you need time to talk about this. This will be in the slides as well, and it's just some perspectives on how we can build our craft, train our coaching mindset, reflect, go into supervision. I love supervision. I was in supervision this morning, and sometimes I'm not enthusiastic about going into supervision, I'm tired or I have my mind on something else. But every time I leave supervision, I'm thrilled. And it's important. We need to reflect about our personal domain. Recording yourself, feedback practice, read inspirations, not necessarily only from coaching books. I learned quite a lot, as I write here, from Calvin and Hobbes and the Big Lebowski. For instance, we can learn from a lot of different places. I think it's time for bringing people in dialogue with each other.
Marvelous.
We have people back and we have 4 minutes left. How do you think we could make use of those 4 minutes?
Well, I would love, before it all goes out of your heads, to for you to just pop into the chat some of the stuff that's been occurring to you while you've been in your breakout rooms. If there's anybody who wants to come off mute and just say what's occurred to them, then
that would also be awesome.
that would be
And
lovely.
I've just had the opportunity to read some of the comments that I missed in the first place while you were out, and I just love it. I just love it. Love the idea of building irreverence and want to think more about how I can bring that into my practice. Lovely. Being mindful, but not too much. Permitting self to be on a journey with the client. It's messy. I love that metaphor. Yeah, it's messy. As usual, very useful and powerful to share with other coaches and learn from these TPS sessions. Thank you so much. Thank you, Katrin. Thank you for participating and contributing. Be there is only one. Be you, there's only one of you. Yes. And we all have that responsibility to build our own professional identity. Think silences and let the processing happen and don't get rattled by doubt. I love it. Nicola? Yeah.
I had that reminds me actually of a I had this wonderful training once by somebody who showed people how to give TED Talks, and he said I give talks. He said he mentioned this country. Said, well, I go over to this country. Do you know how I know they're loving it? I said, how? He says they sit there like this. He says the best feedback I ever get from any of my presentations is when people are sitting there like that. If you'd have just taken that as a I'm terrible, then their experiences aren't necessarily your experience, or your experiences of what you think their experiences aren't necessarily their actual experiences. So that don't get rattled by doubt. I just saw that from Ulrika and I thought that reminded me.
Are Jacob or the Danish straight like the Dutch?
Straight in what way?
Straight talking, very direct.
No.
Okay.
I think the Norwegians would be less direct than us. We'd be slightly more direct than the Norwegians and perhaps equally direct as the Swedes. But we're perhaps known for our kind of consensus-seeking, harmonizing preference. That's
who wins the fight about who's a Viking and who's not?
I think perhaps we left the Viking identity long ago. But Heidi, please chip in. What are your thoughts on this? Heidi is also Danish.
Danes are the real Vikings.
Ah.
Yeah.
Well, if no one else says something different, let's just agree to that.
I think it's always the quiet ones.
I'm in East Anglia in the UK, and we have a prevalence in the east of England for this condition called Duprane's, where your hands get like that, and apparently that is it's like a Viking genetic thing. Maybe we got this prevalence here of our hands doing this. My hand's okay, but generally, so I'm going to lay claim to a little bit of Viking in the east of England as well. But we are at time. Can you believe it? But Jacob, before we get to the final few seconds, I wondered if I could just collect from you what your reflections are from this session. What stuck with you today?
The first thing that pops into my mind is that I feel enormously seen. So the feedback and the comments in that section makes me feel part of something, makes it very comforting for me to be behind the screen, and I feel connected. So that's the first thing that pops up. And then I want to take a session by myself to reflect on what's going on in the comment section and use that to reflect and learn more, because there were so many great points. And then just, I'm not finished with my reflections on my craftsmanship. And if I was to talk about this in an hour, I would already say something slightly different than what I just did. And to me, that's just amazing how our craftsmanship is not developed in a vacuum. It's developed in relation to others. So that's probably my thoughts. Thanks for the question.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Jacob, thank you for this session. It's been really fun. And it's been really, really great to explore with you some of the things that make us what we are, and some of the things which show how we turn up in our practice. And it's been a really, really great conversation. And I think on behalf of everybody here, I thank you very much.
I'll return it. Thank you so much.
It's
I love every bit of it. So thank you for playing along and contributing. Thank you.